Today, there are 2 million descendants of French-Canadian immigrants living in New England. These are our stories. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Venez tous jeunes filles et garçons, je vais vous raconter l'histoire de notre immigration ici au USA, de grands aventuriers de pays étrangers.
This is the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast. I am Jesse Martineau. Now, a couple of months ago, I had the absolute privilege to be interviewed on a YouTube show called Raconte mes ancêtres. It was a very fun conversation, and it was great to be featured on a terrific show. Raconte mes ancêtres is a show that tells the story of our ancestors. It seeks to explore where these ancestors came from and discuss what we might be able to piece together about the lives they lived. They feature interviews, obviously, but they also highlight histories of particular places, all the way down to individual homes. And it is an absolutely fascinating project, and I am very excited to speak with the men behind that project, Eric Beliveau Yan Lauzon. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Jesse. Thanks for having us.
Okay, so before we get going about your show and your project, I'd like to get a little background kind of about where you guys are from, where you're coming from. So if I could start, maybe each of you talk a little bit about where you're from, a bit about your life, and how it is that you found this interest in telling the story of our ancestors. And Eric, maybe you can start for us.
Well, actually, I've been doing some genealogy for the last maybe so far 25 years or so. I was aware of my ancestors because my dad told me a lot about you. He used to do the genealogy of the Beliveau line at the time because before internet it was pretty hard to have all the information that we have today. So my dad was talking to me about the story of our ancestors that were Acadian because my name is Beliveau, so it went through the deportation of the Acadian, and then they came back to Quebec. When I was 20, it started to be a little easier to find all these information about our ancestor on internet, and I started to do some research a little bit like 25 years ago or 20 at the beginning of my 20s. And then it stopped, because I had kids and, the life is getting a little bit harder and, you have a hard time to find some time for your passion. But then it came back, when a little bit before COVID, I started back doing some genealogy, and finding names and finding all the stuff and, all the dates and the places they were born and all this thing, but it's kind of interesting, but, it's when I started to find out more about the history of those people. Jean-Baptiste Beliveau, who was the first one who came into Quebec, actually he was born in Acadia and he was deported. I mean, when you see all the dates and you see the places, it tells you not that much. But if you go find the history behind that, that's where it gets interesting. So that's kind of where I got the idea of saying, why don't we put genealogy together and history, which is, there's some people who do history. They have history channels. We have a lot of content about our history. We're pretty lucky on this, either on TV shows or TV series like Les Filles de Caleb or some stuff like that. But mixing genealogy, the story of our people, of your ancestors with the real story they got behind, that was pretty something that I didn't see that existed. So as I was saying to Yan like a few days ago, nobody did it. So, and then COVID came, we had a little more time, we had the technology, and I said, why don't I bring a channel about history and genealogy together? So that's where
Eric is a guy that always tells a story. He's very great at counting stuff, telling stuff.
Sure.
So when he started a chain, I was like so not surprised that he was telling stories and talking about history and stuff like that.
And where are you from, Jan? What's your story?
Well, 20 some years ago, my dad had this idea to do the lineage of the Lauzon family from us to the first, people know Gilles Lauzon that came with the Grande Recrue. That's at the beginning of the French Canadian colony. Do the whole line between this and that. And you know, in early 2000, before everything was online on internet, that was hire someone or do a lot of phone calls to actually get information from the different presbytères. And that didn't seem like a lot of fun. But later on, I got a hold of picture albums from my grandparents, well, both my grandmothers. So I've got one picture album from my mom's mom and Hébert, and my grandmother was just like wrote stuff on every single picture. Her idea was pass the information to the next generation, which was aimed at my mom. So for the first time, I saw a picture of my great grandfather that I never met, and it was like, this is awesome. And I've got lots of picture albums from an Ode from my dad's mother, and I have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
So I turn around, I'm like, Dad, do you know this person? Do you know that person? But something to understand is that my dad on the Lauzon side, my grandfather, they were 10 kids. So that's 10 sets of uncle and aunts that had kids.
Right.
So just there's several cousins. I mean, I have 9 cousins. On my dad's mother's side, they were 20 kids, 18 lived to the adult age. So think about 18 couples of aunts and uncles. Well, not exactly, but that's, my dad has over 250 cousins. So you get confused very quick. Names come back. I mean, I've met people with the same name as my dad and my brother that are cousins. It's confusing. So to wrap my head around that, I decided, well, let's make an arbre généalogique. So you make your tree, you build your tree, and there's all the stories you find. One of my great uncles, Hervé Audet, was a frère du Sacré-Cœur. He was he was not a priest, but how do you say that in English?
Like a monk.
Kind of. And
brother. We say brother here too.
Yeah, brother. So he liked genealogy. I love stuff, but he wrote a lot, like I guess several monks do. But he liked genealogy, and while liking that, he wrote a lot of very interesting documents, including a biography from my great grandparents.
That's awesome.
It's awesome. You look, but my idea from there is like, okay, this is information I know from my great grandparents because Hervé wrote it down and somehow it reached me.
Sure.
And I can share it with the world. But as time passes, the story of those people they get lost. If I don't write or tell the story of my parents' grandparents, my great grandchildren would never know about them. And that's when that's where we're coming from. It's like, try to tell the story of those people, what we can find. We do research. The idea of doing geology research is not for us. Is to share it with the world, to share it with the next generation. Other people are interested in that, and there's tons of people that have that we share ancestors with. So we're not alone, and people like it.
Yeah, no,
so that's where we're coming from.
No, that's awesome. And so the name Raconte-moi mes ancêtres. Hopefully, I came semi-close in my pronunciation.
Ancêtres.
Ancêtres. I'm struggling with that.
We don't pronounce the S. It's an accent now. Yeah.
Raconte-moi mes ancêtres.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike, you can edit that in for every other time I've said it. Now, for anyone who might not speak French, can you just a quick translation of what that would be in English and why you chose that name specifically?
Well, actually, I did a little story short when you tried to introduce me to the project, but one of the idea was I remember my father telling the story of my grandfather, and I was like, how come that story is not tell? How come nobody wrote a story about this? How come it's not on a TV show? How come nobody knows about this? And then I was asking some people, or I was doing some research, and my grandfather's story is a story, but it's a story of like a lot of people. And all of those people, all of our grandfather, all of our great grandfather have great stories. I mean, so that's when I said, like, if nobody does it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to I'm going to tell the story of our ancestors. So that's how we can translate Raconte-moi mes ancêtres. Would like
recount me my ancestors.
It's like tell me the story of my ancestor. That's the name of the channel. That's the first thing I was doing is to do, let's say, my great grandparents. I would like go and find out their birth certificate, their wedding, where did they got married, and through the census of all the different census, so I can know what was their job, what he was doing, what was his salary.
Yeah, were they rich or not?
Did they have a radio at home? Some stuff like that.
Sure.
Could they write and read?
Could they write and read? Some stuff like that. So through all these documents, I tell the story of my great grandparents that I've never met, but actually it's the grandparents of my father. So you've known them, but there's a lot of things that he didn't know, like there's my grandmother had a sister that she never known because it was before her birth, but she got killed by a train. And
wow.
That we can find that story like in the La Presse, the whatever the date is, so I put that story
it's in the newspapers.
Maybe my grandmother didn't even known about that story. Maybe she had never known that she had a sister, but it was the story of my great grandparents still, if my grandmother wasn't born.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I like a lot about your show is not anybody, but a lot of people do genealogy research. And when you do go into the genealogy research, I've done it myself. You spend hours and hours and hours, and you leave there knowing only some names, some dates of when they were born, died, and got married, and maybe if you're lucky, a couple of places. But that's kind of it. And you guys take that information and add so much more to telling their story, which is awesome.
Yeah, because the story of someone is not just getting baptized, getting married, and getting buried. People do have a life, and that's what we're trying to see. What happened during their lifetime. If you just go in the basics of genealogy, you have no information about what those people were doing. But when you start looking at newspaper censuses, I've learned with the latest Canadian census that my great-great-grandfather spoke French and English fluently.
Oh, wow.
He wrote, I was like, cool. I mean, my grandparents didn't speak any kind of good English. My dad didn't know that his great-grandfather did. But that's the kind of stuff that you learn if you do the research. If you don't, I mean, I've got a picture with my grandfather, his dad, his granddad, and his great-granddad, where the Joseph, the my great-great-great-grandfather, number of greats, I'm not sure. It's confusing.
a few greats in there, yeah.
But he's got only one eye, with an eye patch. And it's like, okay, so you're asking around. So apparently it's a train accident. But if you do the research, you can actually find the specific accident. His name is mentioned. His wife died. And this is something that you need to search for. Otherwise, you just won't know. But once you know it, what's interesting that you can tell about it. And people are interesting to learn about that kind of stuff. At train wreck, it's not something that we see that much now, but it was somewhat common in the beginnings of trains.
Absolutely. And I find that pretty interesting. And let's talk about a few different parts of the project that you have on your YouTube channel. So let's start with the one that I kind of introduced, that I got to be part of, the Parlons Ancêtres.
Yeah, let's talk ancestors.
Yes.
Parlons Ancêtres.
And so what is the Parlons Ancêtres, and how is that formatted? What does that look like? If somebody was going to go visit it today, what would they see?
Well, actually, the thing that happened is that by my channel of storytelling about ancestor, and Yan was talking about it a little earlier, he has ancestors that they had 18 children. So he did put a picture on Généalogie Québec website there, and say he was a little bit telling the story of his great grandparents. So, and I knew that he was watching my channels since he was liking some stuff, and we were already friends before. So I wrote down to Yan and said, would you like for me to tell the story of your ancestors? So he said, well, for sure. So we started to
Yeah,
work on the project and we started to write the story. I mean, sometimes he was writing some stuff, sometimes I would be writing some stuff. And the story it's still an ongoing project.
sure.
But the thing is that while we were working on this, every now and then, if once every few months, we would meet on Zoom or something like on live there, and we would say, "Oh, I found this. We're going to talk about this," and blah blah blah. And a lot
Yeah,
of
we should
time,
put that in your show. It's interesting. I find it interesting.
yeah, and it was maybe topics that weren't that much related to the story of his great grandparents. It was story in general of the French Canadian history or whatever history we would talk. And from there we went, why don't we do a show and we talk about one specific topic at a time, and that's when the idea of Parlons Ancêtres came. We're going to talk about our ancestors and a specific topic, like
So we interview someone around this topic. Depending on the topic, the duration can change. But we do have a lot of questions, and it's talking about one specific subject for like an hour and a half, and then we go deep into, well, we cannot in history and genealogy. You can never say everything about a subject.
Hmm.
But what we discuss about the subject, we how it came, what it is, health, war, all kind of stuff. The French Canadian massive immigration to the U.S. And how it came to be. Examples, facts with somebody that has knowledge on that. And then it's called Parlons Ancêtres. It's talk about it. We discuss later on in conclusion. We say about our specific ancestors around that, and we put come back with some of elements of the interview, and put it on in context with a
our
specific
ancestors.
examples.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe if I might add, there's also before COVID came, I remember watching a podcast. If your audience wants to know what's the type of podcast and what it looks like, I mean, the little bit of the idea came from when I listened for the first time. It's called the French Legacy Podcast, and the host was Jesse Martineau, and he was interviewing Timothée Beaulieu. So, so I said, well,
That's awesome.
what a great idea! What a great idea! I mean, and as I told you in our podcast, I was first surprised that there was a Franco-American community that was there, that was active, that knew from where they came from.
It's something we don't
And
hear about very much in our history lessons. They
mm,
say people came to the U.S. and came back, and that's about it.
and the second thing, I was surprised that there was a Putin fest in New Hampshire. so, so
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is true. I mean, and that is something I definitely would like to almost talk about a little bit more. The whole idea, and I found that absolutely true myself when I was up in Quebec for that 6 months. Very, very few people knew that there were people like myself whose ancestors came from Quebec and who spend literally hours every week doing what we can to hang on to that identity or to try to embrace more of that identity, that it's really an enormous part of the lives of a number of us here down in New England, especially because that's the area where I'm from, and that how
Yeah.
very little of that. You guys aren't taught about any of that, I guess, in school, is my
No,
understanding.
no, 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 no. For us, the United States is a melting pot, and everybody's American, and that's how we're told, and that's what we see. But when we hear about people like you that just like the I mean, I understand we like the French French origins that we have, and we relate to France. but it's the same thing, except it's less far in time. So I understand it, and it makes complete sense, but just it's not something that we had, a view on otherwise. So for us, when the first time that Eric was like, "Hey, Jan, they have a Poutine Fest what? How do they even know what Poutine is?"
Next year, we're gonna have to get you guys down here. You guys should
Yeah.
come.
Yeah, you want to see if the Poutine you have there is actually a real Poutine or what.
Yeah, so here's the deal. Some of it is, some of it isn't. I'm gonna be real about that. But we don't have the great cheese. That is
Yeah,
our
that's a
issue. We
secret.
can't get the same type of cheese because we have different
Yeah,
rules about cheese down here.
the cheese needs to do squeak, squeak
Yeah.
when you eat it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
That's the secret. Don't say
yeah.
it too loud.
Wait, we may have to edit this out. I gotta check the legality of it. But my dad he was a kid. He would spend some time during the summer hanging out with cousins up on a farm, Saint Leonard d'Aston. Every year, I guess he would smuggle up cheap cigarettes, and in return, he would come back with a whole bunch of smuggled cheese. That was like the exchange every year when they would go up there for that, which I think is very fun. All right, we're going back. So, in addition, obviously, we got my interview. You did do an interview with Tim Beliveau, who's obviously very well known to the listeners of this podcast. But what are some of the other topics that you guys talk about, and where do you get the idea from these topics?
The first show it was about adoption. We interviewed Eric's father, whose grandfather was adopted. That was an interesting topic because in genealogy, a lot of people are adopted, and we generally have no traces of that. We talked about health. We talked about war. We did like 17 show now.
Yeah.
And he just become always natural. We talked about les filles du roi, les soldats du régiment Carignan-Salière. So if you've got French Canadian ancestors, you absolutely have some of your ancestors that are soldats du régiment Carignan-Salière. And people don't know about these stuff, and we like to highlight all those interesting facts.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, it's to take a picture of what's today's reality or what's our vision of that time's reality also. I mean, what can we say about that time from what these guys were telling us. So that's why I wanted to have my father telling me the story of my grandfather. I had my mother-in-law who had went through the health system from the time where it was the religion who had who was taking care of hospital.
Sure.
Before universal healthcare.
So I mean, so when people are telling that the health system is crap today or whatever, I mean, maybe you should know about like 60 years ago how it was like the health system in Quebec, and what's about the religion or war? What was it war in Quebec? We always hear about how was war in Europe, but what was it
Second
like?
World War in Quebec? Something happened here as well.
Mm-hmm,
How was it?
Yeah, so
we had a show about religion, how it influenced the different communities we have.
Mm-hmm. Also, well, as Yan said, the Soldats du Régiment Carignan-Salière, which I might correct you, we didn't talk about yet the Filles du Roi. We would like to have the topic on Filles du Roi. We did about la colonisation des Laurentides, which is kindly related with the Franco-American history. Because, I mean, why did the les Laurentides and then we went higher is we wanted to get you back here,
Yeah, we opened land up north so people don't go down south. So that's an interesting topic.
Sure. Yeah, so it might not seem to be your story, but it's kind of your story still. It's an impact, about why there's French Canadian that went to United States. So all the topics that like we just spoke, we just interviewed this morning's André Carl Vachon about the Acadians.
Sure.
And all the topics.
Dérangement, which is you most certainly have also people that were deported at some point, and there's a lot of people in the United States that are descendants from those Acadians. Specifically in Louisiana, there's a lot of the Cajun people are Acadian to begin with.
I discovered, thankfully, through this podcast quite a bit. You mentioned that Fille du Roi went out during COVID. A listener who was very, very nice did a bunch of my genealogy and was able to, for the first time, I got actual names of Fille du Roi that I was
Oh yeah.
descended from, and I thought that was kind of fun. I always figured I was, but I just didn't have that information in front of me. Also, it was interesting you talk about the whole health system
Yeah,
because obviously the west side of Manchester here was established by the French Canadian immigrants that came down, and that hospital to this day is called Catholic Medical Center, and it was opened by a priest who came to the west side of Manchester from Quebec, and so that it
is
had
it still
nuns.
handled by priests
It is
or
not.
nuns?
It is not. It is huge now. It's
Uh,
much, much bigger than it used to be. But that, I mean, they opened the giant hospital here in Manchester. Like a whole
yeah,
lot of that
that's
came with them.
interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. And you know, having in anywhere having a church and having an hospital, it's a good it's a big deal. Several regions when they colonized, they didn't have some like the priest would come once in a while, and going to the hospital was a a few days trek. So this is a big thing to build that, and so that says that there was a huge French Canadian colony. So they wanted to make a Catholic hospital. It's interesting.
It is one of the legacies of this town, having that French Canadian background. And another one, of course, the first credit union in the entire United States was here
Oh
in
yeah.
Manchester, New Hampshire. Because again,
Really?
the same guy who opened up the hospital, Monseigneur Eve, he went and contacted Desjardins, who came down here and opened up the very, very first credit union in the entire United States. Was here in the west side of Manchester, New Hampshire. Again, never would have happened if not for that French Canadian connection, which I think is pretty neat. And
Yeah.
that's a giant bank now. So that
Mhm.
still exists. That legacy is
Oh.
still there.
Oh,
Nice.
there's one topic also that we forgot to mention is about sports. We're
Oh
talking about
yeah.
the history of hockey, but especially one on summer sports. And one of the reason in Quebec we're playing baseball is because of the French Canadian immigration into United States. Because the one who had a little bit of money, they want their kids to go to school in French school, which they could go like primary school, they could go maybe to have French schools in northeast of United States, but if they want to go at higher level, they had to go back to Quebec City in college, and that's from there that these guys they learned baseball in the United States and they brought it to Quebec, and from there we started to play baseball.
That's very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Before Babe Ruth, you heard about Naplojoy?
We did. Yeah, we done it.
Naplojoy's real
We
name
did an
is
episode.
Napoleon Lajoie.
Yeah, we did an
Mhm.
episode on him for sure. From Woonsocket.
Yeah.
Yeah,
My great grandfather was about the same age and went, grew up a bit in Woonsocket. So
at the
most
same
likely
time.
played baseball. Yeah, most likely played baseball with him.
Or maybe he worked at the shop with him.
Well,
Probably.
that's definite. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Very, very cool. No, that's way, way fun. A couple other things you guys do on the show. I want to talk about the Sur la route des nos ancêtres. What
Yeah.
can you explain what that side of the project's about?
Well, that's an idea I got this summer. I mean, that was I really that might seem a little weird, but I really like to go into cemetery. I think that a lot of history of the
Sure.
place is written down just like in front of us there. And from a quick view, we can have an idea of which family were like the ones that were there first, or they had more influence in the city, like if you go. So from there, as I said, I like to talk about the story of people. I like to talk about really the history around those people.
Sure.
So that was an idea so that I could go in any place in Quebec and go and find a little bit about the story of that place and the people who built it. And why is there rue Rioux in Trois Pistoles? Why is there Séguin in that much in Rigaud? And why is there that much Tremblay in Charlevoix? So I'm going to go up and try to explain, because as so far when I'm talking about ancestor, it's like my great grandparents, our great grandparents, or our great-great-grandparents, that place. But with this Sur la route de nos ancêtres, it will let me go a little higher, like in the colony. Maybe like Île d'Orléans, it's
Sure.
one of the first after Quebec. It's Quebec, Trois-Rivières, Montréal, but then, Île d'Orléans was pretty much in the first, and we have a lot of ancestors that come from Île d'Orléans.
Big
Like
families that are still there in Quebec now.
Beautiful
So
place.
yeah. So at the same time, it let me understand and let people understand why there is so much Tremblay in that area. Why is there some Martineau and the South Shore of Quebec? Why is there Beliveau in Saint-Grégoire de Nicolet? But why won't you find any Beliveau in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean? There's
because Eric was traveling, I was traveling, and we both do the same thing. We look at what we can find over there, and Eric was like, "So what can I do with this? Like, we're going there. There is history inside those cemeteries. Let's not forget about them. But how can we present that? What can we do with this information that is there in our lands? And it came simply by showing the headstones, the names. When you look at the cemetery, if you go in your local cemetery, you look at the names, and some names will be there once, twice, but some names will be there like every third tombstone. That's because the family was big there. If the family was big, it's because they came there and they did stuff, and there's value in this knowledge that is hidden in the cemeteries, and so the idea is to expose that, and it's an interesting form.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I think you guys, when you do come down, because I'm going to make sure you guys come down now for Poutine Fest, I'll take you to, we have a giant cemetery here in Manchester that is, you'll see, it's huge, and the names are basically all French names.
That's impressive. That's the kind of stuff we don't know about.
Yeah.
Because for us, well, sometimes we see names like Chez Leboeuf, and like that's a French name. He doesn't pronounce it good, but it's a French name. But otherwise, we generally think that it just vanished. That's how it is taught to us. And it is a massive revelation for us that it's not, and it's there and it's living, and this is even more interesting than talking to French cousins.
Yeah, no, I do want to tell you about one more thing you guys have too. Histoire d'une maison, because I think that's kind of fun. That is something that is definitely different than I've seen before. Can you explain what that's about?
Well, I have moved lately a year ago, but actually I bought the house 4 years just before COVID, and there was some work to do, before we moved there. And while they were cleaning up in the roof of the garage there, they found a box of a lot of documents, like documents from the war, documents that they were selling the lot, or they were buying the lot, or it could be a will. It could be, l'exemption, where there was, how do you call this? L'exemption de la conscription there because in the Military Act.
The draft?
So the draft,
yeah,
so the exemption from the draft. All kind of stuff of all those documents that I think, if I remember well, it's either 1902 or 1903. That's the oldest one. And it tells the story of that family that, I bought the house from, but it was owned by people from that family since the beginning, like since 1890 or something, 1880 or something.
Yeah, so there's more than a century's worth of paperwork, not everything, but a lot of stuff. And you can be surprised of what you can learn from all kind of paperwork that you have.
Yeah, and with all those paper, what I do is I take one paper at a time. I do one video and explain all the context behind that. If it's a school tax, well, I'm going to talk about schools at the time. If it's about war, I'm going to talk about the war at the time and how it probably impact people that were living on that lot 100 years ago.
No, I think it's very, very neat. It's a terrific idea. And again, taking some of the bare minimum of what we have and then putting in those hours to do the research and taking what is just a document and turning into a story is amazing, is a super talent. And I think it's very, very interesting. Very cool. I do want to talk about, if I don't talk something about the future going forward, I think Tim Beaulieu would be disappointed in me because we talk a lot about the past, obviously on this show and a lot of my show, but something that sticks with me quite a bit, I think about a lot, is the fact that, Franco-Americans and you guys up in Quebec, we clearly share a past. What I would love to do is make steps to make sure that we share a future as well. What do you think we can do? Or if you have any ideas, thoughts about what can be done to maybe draw that connection a little better than what we have done so far, so you guys know that we exist and that some of us spend more time up in Quebec, that kind of thing.
Well, I think you need to do more promotion about the Poutine Fest and have some kind of tour bus comes from up north and go over there, because people would find it hilarious to say that, I went to Poutine Fest in the US, because we have Poutine Fest everywhere in Quebec, but it's
sure.
It's a Quebec Poutine Fest, but going to the United States to go to a Poutine Fest would be something interesting for lots of people, and it would be for me. So so yeah, but there's having some kind of exchanges, just for people to know that there are people in the U.S. that are trying to trace back their French Canadian roots would be interesting to lots of people. So that could be interesting.
Yeah, and I also think that your project of Héritage is part of the solution. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
I think there's not one thing that we can do. It's
Sure.
a lot of little things that we can do, and probably that what we're doing now is one of those
For sure.
thing. And I think also that we should talk about this like in more in the deeper way, in like maybe a focus group or something. But I think there's a lot of ideas that can be done to get closer with our both culture on both sides of the border.
Sure. Well, this has been a ton of fun. It is flown by from my perspective. Again, we've been talking with Eric Beliveau and Yan Lauzon behind Raconte-moi mes ancêtres. And this is just an amazing YouTube project. I was incredibly, incredibly excited to be part of it. In full disclosure, once we finished recording last time, I think we talked longer afterwards than we did during the actual recording of the show, because it's just two super, super interesting guys that are way fun to talk to. So thank you very much for joining the podcast.
Well, thanks for the invitation. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Thanks, everyone.
Now our fathers look at us and sigh with despair, to think that everything they love we simply do not share. But the spirit never dies, our culture will survive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive.
Special thanks to Josie Vachon for providing the music. You can find more about her at josievachon.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Mike Campbell. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at fclpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FCL Podcast for more information about the topics discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this episode.